Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is longtime advocate for families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Sandra Delaronde. Delaronde, who is Cree and Métis, has served as co-chair of Manitoba's MMIWG2S coalition. She played a major role in developing and overseeing the Helen Betty Osborne Memorial Scholarship, established in 2000 to honor the young woman who was murdered in the Pas in 1976. Delaronde is also the principal of Northern Sage Consulting. Sandra, thanks so much for being on the show this week.
Yes, thank you for having me.
As mentioned, you're a long-time advocate for MMIWG, the families. Winnipeg and Manitoba is often referred to as ground zero for this crisis. Is that something that you would agree with?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that the stats across the country show that Winnipeg and Manitoba continues to be ground zero.
Well, what do you think is behind those high rates in Winnipeg and Manitoba?
I think there's a lack of genuine systemic response to the issues around safety and well-being of Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse people. Prime example is the landfill and the failure to search, the ongoing failure to search the landfill, leading to at least 3 women being found in dumpsters in the past year. So that becomes a place where perpetrators feel that it's safe to get rid of their victim because no one's going to search.
Right. You know, we're a year on from when it was announced that the likelihood that these women were in the landfill. Are you shocked that we've still not even started searching?
I'm shocked. I feel for the families that, that we spent time with them in the fall as they were going through the pre-trial motions, that nothing has been done as yet. And then they're going to be going into the trial with their loved ones probably still in the landfill.
Yeah, many difficult days ahead for the families indeed. The rates of violence against women, Indigenous women, are pretty astounding. Statistics Canada recently put out data that Indigenous women in this country are 6 times more likely to be victim of homicide than their non-Indigenous counterparts. Do you think other jurisdictions are facing the same types of issues as Winnipeg and Manitoba?
I think the one that may come closest to Manitoba is BC. What I can say is that while in Manitoba there is, has the ground zero, the highest incidence of homicide, we also have found, with the exception of the issues around the landfill, which are, political as well as systemic, that there is overall a higher solve rate of homicides in Manitoba as well.
Okay. We talked before about the national inquiry, which we're, I think, 4 years out or almost 5 years out, and the number of recommendations that you believe that have even been addressed. Pretty shocking number there.
Yes, I mean, we have been, the evidence shows that only 2 of the 231 recommendations plus have been actually implemented and acted upon, and those are in the area of federal corrections. The real substantive recommendations that address systemic change are still untouched.
Right. As we mentioned, the last few years have been particularly grim here in Manitoba and in Winnipeg. When we talk about the 4 women that are believed to have been killed by the serial killer, one of those women still yet to be identified. Police recently saying Indigenous women accounted for 21% of all homicides in RCMP jurisdictions in the last 3 years. And 8 Indigenous women have already been killed in RCMP jurisdictions this year. Does it feel to you like things have been getting worse since the national inquiry wrapped up and since that final report came out?
Yes, and so 8 in 2023 in RCMP jurisdiction in Manitoba. Yes, things continue to, the violence against Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse people continues to rise. And because I believe that society as a whole and institutions are not taking responsibility for their parts. I don't believe, and what concerns me as well is that Indigenous women and girls and our gender diverse relatives are not the problem. We have been targeted for many years and continue to be targeted. If we talk about this from the long term, from the time of the release of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, including up to the National Inquiry, to today, where there has been no progress in changing systems. So as a result, we continue to be victimized and targeted.
There is a lot of focus that tends to be on the federal government and what they have and have not done in terms of addressing the 231 calls for justice, but there's calls for justice for everybody, right? This isn't just about the federal government, this is everyday people and institutions, and we don't really hear what types of action, if any, is being taken from any of those services.
That's true, because there is no action being taken. We have, in the past couple of years, have met with different institutions and bodies and really encourage them to look at the calls to justice and look at what they can do. And part of that is, focusing on education and being able to provide that information to educators and to students, because with students are going to be the next group of policymakers and change makers and legislatures. So it's good for them to know now and to have them wrap their minds around how can we effectively change systems. And because we know this problem is not going to be resolved this year or 5 or 10 years, it took a while to get here and it's going to take a while to move forward. But we have to move today to address the issues.
Well, I guess, one organization or service that is trying to address the calls for justice in one way is the Manitoba RCMP, who recently outlined some ways that they would address the calls for justice that affect policing. You were the MC for that event. A joint action circle was announced. Will you be part of the joint action circle?
I will be. I'm not quite sure what role I will play on that committee, but we'll certainly be addressing the calls to justice, the implementation of the calls to justice that deal with policing. We have worked with the RCMP since for sure 2019 to take action on the calls to justice, and with community members and women and families, we work to support the RCMP in Manitoba develop a plan.
What are your hopes for the Joint Action Circle?
Well, I think that we want to see measurable results so that so that there's faster resolution of violence against women, charges that come before women, that women feel safe making, going to the RCMP and making their complaints, that those complaints move forward in a timely way, and that the investigations are fulsome so that they can go before the courts and that there can be justice for the victims.
Do you feel this is supposed to be an Indigenous-led initiative here with the RCMP? Do you feel this is a change in some way, or you're hoping this will be a change in the way that things have been done in the past?
I'm hoping it is a change, and I'm hoping that the Indigenous partners that have been identified, come in with the view to change the circumstances and that are not hung up on distinction-based processes, because victims aren't identified, by whether they're First Nations or Métis or Inuit. They are just victims. And how do we support people in moving through that system quickly?
Sandra, much more to talk about. We've just got to step aside for a quick break. But stick around. We're going to continue the conversation here with Sandra Delaronde on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Sandra Delaronde, a longtime community advocate, and we've been talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit people, something you've been working on for decades now. As part of that, you're also part of the Red Dress Alert Consultations. First off, I guess, can you tell us about what the alert is and how it would work?
Well, we're hoping that the Red Dress Alert becomes part of the national system, that it's, of course, regulated by CRTC. And that when we also want to ensure it's responsive to community by having either family members or community members sit with the decision makers in determining when an alert goes out on the system and what level of alert goes out on the system. So, so that is what the consultations are about. However, it's not just about, that alert. It's also what happens when an alert is issued. For example, if an alert goes out, and then what happens? I think it's important to be able to support the family and communities, because right now there is no process in place beyond, we might have Bear Clan or Aboriginal Alert put up an alert, but there's no one to help the family to search for their loved one. Right. And even those search processes, ground search processes, are something that's determined by the police service, whether it's Winnipeg Police or RCMP. So, so that also has to be taken into account, because those alerts, the ground searches, are all driven by police services.
So sounds like there's a lot of consultation to still take place. Are we close to having this as a reality?
Well, yes, we're doing, we have had consultations in December and then again this month, and we're hoping to present to the federal, provincial, territorial and Indigenous organizations in the beginning of February.
Okay. You've spoken about how the money that is announced for MMIWG2S initiatives, often millions of dollars from the federal government, doesn't make it down to the front lines or the families and Indigenous women that need it. I guess, where do you think the money is ending up, and how can it be a better process?
Well, I have no idea where it's ending up, but I do know that families that need support through a judicial process, whatever that would be, families that need support for ground searches, and you know, when they are dealing with loss or going through a court system, that's where the support is needed. So every time those events take place, we have to, you know, do fundraising, do GoFundMes, and there isn't a whole lot of support for GoFundMe or other kind of crowdsource for Indigenous people in general because of the perception that we have access to all this money because of the federal and provincial announcement of dollars, but it doesn't come down to doing that type of real work in the community that's necessary.
There was a press release from the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Manitoba, Kuwait, Naui, Okimakanak, and the Southern Chiefs Organization right before Christmas when we had another incident here in the city that was calling for immediate action from the federal government on the MMIWG2S crisis in Manitoba that I believe was met with silence. I didn't hear anything coming from the feds about that. But the last line in that press release really stuck with me, and it was attributed to the Elders Council. And it said, "The violence we are perpetrating against ourselves and others must come to an end." What do you make of that statement?
I think it's true. But also I think in how, so there is the violence in the street, there's violence between Indigenous people, of course, and there's also, you know, the organizations that don't have clear messaging on how they're going to support or how they do currently support women and girls and our gender diverse relatives that experience violence. So I think that kind of housekeeping has to take place. But I also know that the level of violence is a direct impact of systems not paying attention, not taking action, not changing to ensure that, you know, that there is less incidents of violence. The National Inquiry had you know, and it really comes down to a couple of issues. That's mental health, the lack of a universal basic income, and the greater use of non-medical drugs on the street. So even from July to December of 2023, the increase in drugs and the lethal impact of those drugs have had a real negative impact on our community.
Right. Sandra, much more to talk about here, including why you do this work. We just have to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Sandra Delaronde, and we've been talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. As we mentioned, you've been at this work for decades. What was it that drove you into this type of advocacy?
I think so my first memory of advocacy was with the death of Helen Betty Osborne in the PA, and how her friends came to my parents' house and sat with my mom at her kitchen table. And I was a kid, but I was like eavesdropping. I don't remember what was said, but I remember that the young women felt safe being at my mom's table. And it always stuck with me, you know, like being afraid of who the killers might be, and that there was no justice for Betty. And then, so beyond that is this whole issue of how Indigenous women are treated. But I also know that the greatest changes in our country have been the result of the work of Indigenous women. You know, whether it be Bill C-31 or Jordan's principle, you know, those reflecting on how strong our women are, and I think we really need to focus on that, you know, the beauty and strength and intelligence and contributions of Indigenous women to our country.
And decades later, you were instrumental in setting up the Helen Betty Osborne bursary. Great work there. Over $1 million, I believe, has been handed out to Indigenous students over the years.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, and almost 1,000 students, I think. So it has made a difference. And for students, it's not just about an award, it's about what it means.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you do a lot of work, as we've been saying. A lot of it's behind the scenes, not in the spotlight. But I guess, so how do you stay grounded and keep pushing forward with such tough subjects that you work with?
I have a very strong family, a tight-knit family that we support and love each other, and also, you know, take care of my spirit and my physical body. We do laughter yoga. I teach people how to do laughter yoga, so that's a big part of how we can continue to move forward, is keep moving physically, enjoy life, all those things.
Yeah, so much more we could have talked about. The laughing yoga, the recent work with National Ribbon Skirt Day as well, and how important that is. But fortunately, we're out of time, Sandra, but we do thank you so much for being on the show this week and for all the work that you're out there doing, that you're not always getting some of the credit maybe that you should be.
Oh, thank you.
That is all the time we have for the show this week. You can always catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website. That's aptnnews.ca. Or you can also visit our APTN News page on YouTube. This show and past episodes are also available as podcasts, and you can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast or anywhere else you download your podcasts. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face this week. I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you back here in 7 days.